Welcome to Audiobook English Stories. I am so glad you are here with me today. Tonight, I will tell you a story of a hero who lived long ago. This is the story of a man who changed the world with light. Many people know his name today, but few people know how his journey truly began. Tonight, we go back in time to a small house in a quiet town. In this town, there was a young boy named Thomas Edison. His family called him Al. Al was not like other children. He was a very curious boy. He had big, blue eyes that always looked at the world with questions. He did not just play with toys. He wanted to know why. Why does the wind blow? Why does the fire burn? Why do the birds fly? Every day, Al asked his mother and father many questions. Sometimes, his father was tired, but Al did not stop. He wanted to understand everything. One warm morning, the sun sent golden light into the family barn. The barn was quiet and smelled of dry hay. Al went inside and sat down on a pile of soft grass. He saw a mother goose. The goose was sitting on her eggs. Al watched her for a long time. He was very still. He saw a small crack in one egg. Then, a tiny baby bird came out. Al's eyes went wide with surprise. How does that happen? Al thought. He had a big idea. He wanted to see if he could hatch an egg. 2. Al went to the kitchen and took some eggs. He went back to the barn and made a small nest in the hay. Then, he sat on the eggs. He sat very still, just like the mother goose. He waited and waited. He wanted to feel the life inside the eggs. He wanted to see if his warmth could make a bird. Later, his mother, Nancy, came to the barn. She looked for Al. She found him sitting in the hay with eggshells on his pants. She did not get angry. She saw his curious face and she smiled. She knew her son was different. She knew he had a mind that never rested. Thomas was a small boy, but he had a big dream. He did not know it yet. But that dream would one day change the dark nights of the world. He was a boy who loved to learn by doing things. If he had a question, he tried to find the answer with his own hands. The people in the town thought Al was strange. They did not understand why he sat on eggs. They did not understand why he collected glass jars and old wires. But Al did not care. He was happy in his world of questions. He felt safe in the barn, surrounded by the sounds of the farm and the smell of the earth. But as the years went by, the quiet life of the farm began to change. Al grew taller, and his questions grew bigger. He wanted to go to school to learn more. He thought school would have all the answers he wanted. He was excited to sit at a desk and listen to a teacher. He did not know that his time in school would be very short. He did not know that the world outside his barn was not always kind to curious boys. A big change was coming to his life, and it would start on his very first day of school. Al picked up his books and walked down the dusty road. He looked at the blue sky and felt happy. But today was the last day he would feel this simple peace. His real journey was about to begin. And it would be a journey filled with many challenges. Thomas walked to his new school with a heart full of hope. He carried his books and a small slate to write on. He thought the teacher would have all the answers to his many questions. But the school was a cold and quiet place. The teacher did not like questions. The teacher wanted all the children to sit still and be silent. Thomas could not sit still. His mind was always moving. He looked at the birds outside the window. He looked at the dust dancing in the sunlight. One day, the teacher became very angry. He pointed at Thomas and whispered a mean word. He said Thomas was addled. In those days, that word meant a child was slow or could not learn. Thomas ran home with tears in his eyes. He told his mother, Nancy, what the teacher said. Nancy was a very kind and wise woman. She looked into her son's eyes, and she did not see a slow boy. She saw a bright, burning light. She took Thomas back to the school the next morning. She stood in front of the teacher and spoke with a strong voice. My son is not addled, she said. He has more sense than you do. I will teach him myself. From that day, Thomas never went back to a regular school. He only went to school for 3 months in his whole life. Nancy became his greatest teacher. She sat with him at the wooden kitchen table every day. She gave him books about history, science, and poetry. She did not tell him to be silent. She told him to read and to think. Thomas loved to learn this way. He read every book in their small house. Soon, he wanted to do more than just read. He wanted to see how things worked. He asked his mother if he could use the cellar under their house. He started his very first laboratory there. He collected hundreds of glass jars. He labeled every jar with the word poison so no one would touch his things. In the dark cellar, Thomas felt like a king. He spent all his money on chemicals and wires. He mixed liquids to see them change color. He listened to the clink of the glass and the fizz of his experiments. His mother watched him from the top of the stairs. She was happy because her son was happy. Thomas was learning a very important lesson from his mother. She taught him to believe in himself when the world did not. She taught him that it was okay to be different. This belief was like a warm fire in his heart. It gave him the courage to try new things. But the cellar was small, and chemicals were expensive. Thomas needed a way to earn money to keep his laboratory growing. He was only 12 years old. But he was ready to work. He looked toward the train tracks that ran near his town. A new idea was beginning to grow in his mind. He did not know that his next job would take him away from his mother's quiet table. He did not know that a great danger was waiting for him on the moving train. Thomas was only 12 years old. But he was ready to work. He wanted to buy more chemicals and more glass jars for his laboratory in the cellar. He found a job on the Grand Trunk Railroad. Every morning, he got on the train to sell newspapers, sandwiches, and sweet candy to the passengers. The train was a loud and exciting place. It moved fast through the green fields, and the steam engine made a loud choo-choo sound that filled the air. Thomas loved the smell of the fresh newspaper ink. He liked to talk to the people on the train, but Thomas did not stop being an inventor. He asked the conductor if he could use a small corner of the baggage car. He moved his bottles and his wires from his house to the moving train. While the train bumped and turned on the tracks, Thomas sat in his small lab and watched his chemicals. He was happy because he was earning money and learning at the same time. One afternoon, the train hit a rough piece of track. The baggage car shook violently. A bottle of phosphorus fell from a shelf and broke on the wooden floor. Suddenly, there was a bright flash of fire. The dry wood began to burn, and gray smoke filled the small car. Thomas tried to put out the fire with his coat, but the flames were growing fast. The conductor ran into the car. He saw the fire, and he was very, very angry. He put out the fire, but he did not forgive Thomas. In his anger, the conductor hit Thomas on the side of his head. Then, at the next station, the conductor threw Thomas and all of his glass jars off the train. Thomas sat in the dirt and watched the train pull away. A strange silence began to fall over the world. Thomas realized that his ears felt heavy and dull. He could not hear the birds singing as clearly as before. He could not hear the wind in the trees. He was losing his hearing because of the hit to his head. He was becoming deaf. Many people would be sad or angry. But Thomas was different. He looked at his broken bottles and then at the quiet world around him. He did not know it yet. But this silence would become his greatest tool. He was about to learn that when you cannot hear the world outside, you can hear your own thoughts much better. The fire on the train had burned his lab, but it did not burn his spirit. He was a boy in a silent world, but a new spark of an idea was waiting for him. He was ready to find a new way to listen to the heartbeat of the world. The fire on the train was gone, but the world was now very quiet for Thomas. He could not hear the loud whistle of the steam engine or the voices of the people clearly. At first, he felt a small fear in his heart. But Thomas was a boy who looked for the good in every problem. He realized that the silence was a gift. Without the noise of the world, he could think more deeply. He could focus on his ideas for hours and hours. In this new, quiet world, Thomas discovered a secret language. It was called Morse code. Morse code used short clicks and long clicks to send messages through wires. To Thomas, these clicks were like a heartbeat. He spent his nights learning how to tap the metal key. Tap, 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 tap. Each sound was a letter. Each letter was a word. He became very fast. And soon he was one of the best telegraph operators in the land. Thomas traveled to many different towns to work with the telegraph. He worked late at night while the rest of the world was sleeping. In the dark, with only a small candle for light, he felt a spark of a new dream. He did not want to just send messages for other people. He wanted to invent things that would make life better for everyone. He wanted to find a way to make the machines work faster and better. He stayed awake until the sun came up, reading books and drawing plans in his notebook. He was no longer just a newsboy or a worker. He was an inventor in his heart. He realized that his small town was too small for his big ideas. He needed to go where the big machines were. He needed to go to the center of the world. One cold morning, Thomas packed his few clothes and his favorite books into a small bag. He looked at the quiet streets of his home one last time. He was nervous, but he was also very excited. He was ready to leave the safety of his home and face the giant world outside. He walked toward the station to buy a ticket for a long journey. He decided to leave his small town and go to the big city of New York. He did not have any money in his pocket, but he had a mind full of light. Thomas arrived in the giant city of New York with a very small bag and no money in his pocket. The city was a very loud and busy place. There were tall stone buildings that reached toward the clouds. There were thousands of people walking fast on the streets. And the air was filled with the sound of horses and heavy wagons. To a young man from a small town, New York felt like a different world. Thomas was very hungry, and he did not have a bed to sleep in. He walked for many hours, looking at the bright shop windows. Finally, he found a small basement in a gold company where he could sleep on the floor. This company used a very large and expensive machine to tell the price of gold. The machine was full of tiny metal parts that moved and clicked all day long. Thomas watched the machine with his curious eyes, learning how every wheel and wire worked. One morning, the big machine suddenly stopped. Clunk. The metal wheels did not turn. The tick-tick sound was gone. The office became very quiet, and then very loud with shouting. The leaders of the company were very worried because they were losing a lot of money. They called for their best workers, but no one could fix it. The room was filled with men in expensive suits who looked very nervous. Thomas stepped forward from the shadows of the basement. He looked at the machine and saw a small piece of metal that was broken. "I can fix it," Thomas said in a quiet but steady voice. The men looked at the young, tired boy with messy hair and dirty clothes. They did not believe him, but they had no other choice. Thomas took his tools and worked with his fast, strong hands. He did not look at the people watching him. He only looked at the machine. After a few minutes, he moved a small spring and turned a wheel. Suddenly, the machine began to move again. Tick, tick, tick. The gold prices began to print on the paper. The leaders were so happy that they gave Thomas a very good job and a lot of money. For the first time in his life, Thomas was not poor. He had enough money to buy all the chemicals and books he wanted, but he did not want to stay in a busy office in New York City. He had a bigger dream. He wanted to build a place where he could invent something new every single day. He bought a piece of land in a quiet place called Menlo Park. He built a large wooden house with many windows and long tables. He called it his invention factory. He was no longer a boy sitting in a barn. He was a man ready to change the future. He began to hire other curious people to help him build his dreams. Thomas used his new money to build a special place in a town called Menlo Park. It was a large wooden building with many windows and long tables. Thomas did not call it an office. He called it his invention factory. He wanted to create new things every single day. And he hired other curious people to help him. They worked together like a big family, surrounded by glass jars, metal wires, and big books. One day, Thomas was working on a machine to send messages. He noticed that the machine made a strange, humming sound. He had a very big idea. Can a machine talk? He wondered. Everyone thought this was impossible. They thought only humans and animals could make sounds. But Thomas did not listen to them. He began to build a small machine with a metal cylinder and a thin piece of foil. He spoke into the machine in his steady voice. He said the words to a famous poem, "Mary Had a Little Lamb." Then, he turned a handle on the side of the machine. To his surprise, the machine spoke back to him. It said his own words. In a small, metallic voice, Mary had a little lamb. Thomas was so happy that he jumped up from his chair. This machine was called the phonograph. It was the first time in history that a human voice was recorded and played back. Word of this talking machine spread quickly across the world. People began to call Thomas the Wizard of Menlo Park because his inventions felt like magic. But Thomas was not a magician. He was a man who worked very hard. He spent all his time in the factory, often sleeping on a wooden table for just an hour before starting again. He was proud of the phonograph, but he was already looking at the dark sky outside his window. He saw the orange glow of candles and the smoky smell of oil lamps. He knew that fire was dangerous and the light was weak. He wanted to give the world a new kind of light, a light that was clean, safe, and as bright as the sun. He did not know that this would be his hardest challenge yet. Thomas was a man who loved the night, but he did not like the darkness. In those days, when the sun went down, the world became a very dark and dangerous place. People used small candles and oily lamps to see. These lamps made a lot of black smoke, and they smelled very bad. Worst of all, they used fire. If a candle fell over, a whole house could burn down in minutes. Thomas sat by his window in Menlo Park and looked at the distant stars. He had a very big dream. He wanted to make a sun in a bottle. He wanted a light that was clean, safe, and bright. But it had to work without a flame. He wanted to use the power of electricity, the same power as the lightning in the sky, to light up every home in the world. When he told people about his idea, many of them laughed. "You are a dreamer, Thomas," they said. "Electricity is for machines and big sparks. You cannot put it inside a small glass bulb. It will be too hot, or it will go out in a second." Even some of the smartest scientists said it was impossible. They thought the Wizard of Menlo Park had finally lost his magic. But Thomas did not care what they said. He remembered his mother's voice. He remembered that she believed in him when no one else did. He knew that every great invention started with a dream that people thought was crazy. He gathered his team of workers in the factory and pointed to a small glass bulb on the table. "We are going to make this glow," Thomas said with a steady voice. "We are going to find a way to make a light that stays on all night long. We will not stop until the world is bright." The challenge was very high. To make the light work, he needed a tiny thread inside the glass bulb called a filament. This thread had to be strong enough to get very hot and glow, but it could not burn up or break. Thomas began to look at everything around him: wood, paper, hair, and plants. He was ready to test every material on earth to find the one that would stay lit. He did not know that he was starting a journey that would take a very long time. He did not know that he would have to try 1,000 different things before he saw a single spark of success. The world was waiting in the dark, and Thomas was the only one who believed he could bring the morning into the night. Thomas returned to his laboratory with a fierce determination. He knew that the secret to the light bulb was the tiny thread inside, the filament. But what material could stay hot and glow without burning away? Thomas began a search that no one had ever seen before. He was a man on a mission, and he was ready to test everything in the world. He started with simple things. He tried a piece of cotton thread. It glowed for a second, and then it turned to ash. He tried a sliver of wood. It broke. He tried a piece of paper. It caught fire. His workers brought him hundreds of different materials. They tried spider webs. They tried a hair from a friend's beard. They even tried pieces of cork and leather. Every time a material failed, Thomas did not get angry. He simply picked up his notebook and crossed it off the list. Weeks turned into months. The laboratory was filled with the smell of burning materials and the tired sighs of his men. One evening, one of his workers sat down and put his head in his hands. "It is no use. Mr. Edison," the man said, "we have failed 1,000 times. We have no results." Thomas looked at the man and smiled. A very kind, steady smile. "My friend, we have not failed," Thomas said softly. "We now know 1,000 things that do not work. Every failure brings us one step closer to the one thing that will." This was a very important lesson for everyone in the factory. Thomas taught them that a mistake is just a teacher in disguise. Thomas kept working. He sent his men to faraway lands like China, Brazil, and Japan. He wanted them to find every kind of plant and every kind of fiber. He stayed awake for many nights, his eyes red from the lack of sleep. But his heart was still full of hope. He was a persistent man, and he believed that the answer was waiting for him somewhere in the world. However, as the first test failed, the money began to run low. The people who gave him money were becoming nervous. The newspapers began to write stories saying that Thomas Edison was a dreamer who was wasting his time. The room was often dark, and his heart was tired. But his eyes were still bright with a plan. Thomas sat alone at his desk, surrounded by the silence of the night. He looked at a small piece of common sewing thread on the table. He had an idea to burn it in a special way to make it pure carbon. It was a very delicate plan. And if it failed, he might not have the money to try again. He did not know that he was very close to the greatest moment of his life. He did not know that the darkness was about to disappear forever. But before the light could come, he would have to face one more night of complete silence and doubt. The laboratory was very quiet. Outside, the moon was high in the dark sky, and the wind moved softly through the trees of Menlo Park. Inside, Thomas sat alone at his wooden desk. He was very tired. His eyes were red, and his hands were covered in black dust from the many materials he had tested. It had been a long time since he started his search for the light. He had tried over 1,000 different things, and every single one had failed. The world was starting to laugh at him. In the newspapers, people wrote that his son in a bottle was a dream that would never come true. They said he was wasting his time and his money. Thomas looked at the empty glass bulbs on his table. For a moment, he felt a deep sadness in his heart. He thought about his mother, Nancy. She had always believed in his light. But now he felt like he was failing her dream. He felt completely alone in the silence of the night. "Is it impossible?" he whispered to the empty room. He had no more ideas. He had no more materials to test. He felt like he was standing at the bottom of a very deep, dark hole. He wanted to put his head down and sleep forever. But then, he looked at a small piece of common sewing thread again. It was a simple thing. something his mother might have used to fix a coat. He realized he had to try one more time. He could not give up now, even in the darkest night. A small spark of hope was still hiding in his soul. He did not know that this would be his last night of failure. He did not know that the world was about to change forever because of a simple piece of bamboo. But before that happened, he had to find the strength to stand up and try just one more experiment. The laboratory was still and silent. But Thomas was not finished. He picked up a small piece of bamboo from a fan in the corner of the room. It was a simple, common plant. He carefully burned the bamboo until it turned into a thin, black thread of carbon. He placed this tiny piece of bamboo inside a glass bulb and removed all the air from the glass. Thomas sat at his table and connected the wires. His breath was slow. He turned the switch. Click. Suddenly, the darkness disappeared. A soft, beautiful, golden light filled the room. It was not the flickering light of a candle or the smoky light of an oil lamp. It was a steady, clean glow. Thomas looked at his men, and they looked at him. No one spoke. They were afraid that if they moved, the light would go out. But the light did not go out. 1 hour passed. 2 hours passed. The sun began to rise outside. But the sun in a bottle was still burning brightly on the table. Thomas and his team stayed awake for 40 hours, never taking their eyes off the small glass bulb. They watched it through the day and through the next night. Thomas felt a powerful joy in his heart. He realized that every failure from the past was a teacher that led him to this one moment. He had finally found the secret. He had turned a piece of a plant into a star. He was tired. His body was heavy, but his spirit was jumping with excitement. "We did it," he whispered. "The world will never be dark again." He knew that this was just the beginning. It was not enough to have one light in a laboratory. He wanted to bring this light to every street, every house, and every child in the world. He was ready to show the world that the magic of Menlo Park was real. The news of the successful light bulb spread like a fire. People from all over the country wanted to see the wizard and his new invention. Thomas stood up from his chair, feeling a new strength in his tired arms. He was ready for the greatest night in history. He was ready to flip the switch that would change the world forever. The time for experiments in the small laboratory was over. Thomas was ready to show his light to the whole world. He chose the biggest stage he could find, New York City. At that time, New York was a city of shadows and flickering gas lamps. But Thomas had a plan to change that forever. He worked for many months to lay heavy iron wires under the stone streets. He built a large station with giant steam engines to create the electricity. People watched him and shook their heads. They did not understand why a man would put wires in the dirt. "It will never work," they whispered. But Thomas only smiled and kept working. He was a man who knew that the morning was coming. On a cold September evening, a huge crowd of people gathered on Pearl Street. There were thousands of people, mothers, fathers, children, and even the leaders of the city. They stood in the dark, shivering in their heavy coats. The only light came from the moon and a few smoky lamps. The air was thick with excitement and a little bit of fear. Thomas stood inside his power station. He was nervous, but his hands did not shake. He looked at the large metal switch on the wall. He thought about his mother, Nancy. He thought about the thousands of failures in Menlo Park. He thought about the piece of bamboo that changed everything. He reached out his hand and gripped the cold metal handle. "Are you ready?" he asked his men. They nodded. With one strong move, Thomas flipped the switch. Click. In an instant, the darkness disappeared. 400 glass bulbs on the street and inside the building suddenly glowed with a beautiful golden light. It was like 1,000 stars had fallen from the sky to sit on the lampposts. The people in the street were silent for a moment. They could not believe their eyes. Then, a giant cheer rose up from the crowd. It was a sound of pure wonder. People ran to the windows to look at the light. They put their hands near the glass bulbs. "It is cold," they shouted with surprise. "There is no fire, but there is light." Children laughed and danced in the street because they could see each other's faces as clearly as in the daytime. It was a miracle of science. Thomas walked out into the street and looked up at the glowing bulbs. He felt a deep, sacred peace in his heart. He had turned the night into day. He had kept his promise to make the world bright. Park had shown the world that magic is just hard work and a dream that never gives up. The news of the great night traveled across the seas to every country. People everywhere wanted the light of Thomas Edison. He was no longer just a curious boy from a small town. He was the man who gave the world a new way to live. He had won the battle against the dark, and the world would never be the same again. But Thomas was already thinking about the next step. He knew that light was just the beginning. He wanted to use this power to move trains, to show moving pictures, and to help people in ways they could not yet imagine. The success in New York City was just the beginning. Soon, the golden light of Thomas Edison began to spread across the whole world. In London, Paris, and Tokyo, the dark streets became bright at night. People no longer had to go to sleep when the sun went down. They could read books, work in their shops, and walk safely in the streets at midnight. The world was changing faster than anyone could imagine. Thomas was now the most famous inventor in history. People called him a wizard. But Thomas did not feel like a magician. He still went to his laboratory every day. He still wore his old, dusty clothes and had messy hair. He was a man who loved to solve problems. Now that he had given the world light, he wanted to give the world even more. He went back to his invention factory and started a new project. He wanted to find a way to make pictures move. He invented a large camera called the kinetograph and a special box to watch the film. For the first time, people could see a cat jump or a man dance on a screen. Thomas had invented the very first movies. Everything Thomas touched seemed to turn into something wonderful. He improved the telephone so people could hear voices more clearly from far away. He worked on batteries for cars and machines to help miners underground. His mind was like a fountain that never stopped flowing with new ideas. Because of Thomas, the world became a busy and exciting place. Factories could stay open at night, and hospitals had light to help sick people at any hour. The vessel of fear that the dark night used to be was gone forever. Thomas Edison had not just invented a light bulb, he had invented a new way for humans to live on Earth. As he grew older, Thomas sat in his library, surrounded by thousands of books. He looked at the bright electric lamps on his ceiling and smiled. He was a man who had seen his dreams come true. He was a hero to millions of people. But in his heart, he was still that same curious boy who once sat on eggs in a barn. He had faced many challenges and many failures. But he had never stopped trying. He had turned his silence into focus and his mistakes into lessons. Now, he was ready to share the wisdom he had gathered over his long and bright life. Thomas Edison was now an old man. He sat in his large library, surrounded by the quiet shadows of the evening. But he was not afraid of the dark anymore. With one small movement of his hand, he flipped a switch, and the room was filled with a warm, golden glow. He looked at the 109, 3 papers on his desk. Each one was a record of a different invention. 7 and 4. He had invented the talking machine, the moving picture camera, and the light that never went out. A young student came to visit the old wizard one day. The student looked at all the machines and the thousands of books. "Mr. Edison," the student asked with wonder, "how did you do it? Are you a genius? Do you have a special magic that other people do not have?" Thomas laughed softly. His voice was kind and steady. He looked at his old, tired hands that had worked for so many years. "My young friend," Thomas said, "there is no magic. Many people think that a great idea just falls from the sky like a star. But that is not true." He leaned forward and shared his famous secret. "Genius," Thomas said, "is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." He wanted the young man to understand that having a good idea is only a small part of success. The most important part is the hard work, the perspiration that comes after the idea. It is the thousands of hours of trying, the many nights without sleep, and the courage to keep going when things are difficult. Thomas thought back to the days when he was a boy sitting on eggs in a barn. He thought about his mother, Nancy, who taught him to never give up on himself. He realized that his whole life was a long chain of lessons. Every time he failed, he learned something new. Every time the world said no, he said yes to his own heart. "I never did a day's work in my life," Thomas added with a bright smile. "It was all fun." He loved the work of solving problems. To him, the laboratory was not a place of stress. It was a playground of discovery. He lived a life that was full of light because he followed his curiosity every single day. As the moon rose over his home, Thomas felt a deep sense of peace. He had lived a long, bright life, and he had left the world better than he found it. He knew that his time was coming to an end, but he was not worried. He knew that the light he started would continue to burn in every home and every heart for hundreds of years to come. He had left a legacy of hope and hard work that would never fade away. The life of Thomas Edison teaches us a very important lesson. Never be afraid to fail. Every time Thomas made a mistake, he was actually moving closer to his goal. In your own life, especially when you are learning a new language like English, you might feel like you are making mistakes. Remember Thomas and his light bulb. Every mistake is just a step on your path to success. If you keep trying and keep working, you will eventually find your own light. Thank you for spending this hour with me on Audiobook English Stories. I hope the story of Thomas Edison has filled your heart with hope and your mind with new English words. Your journey in learning is just like his journey in the lab. Keep going. Keep listening, and you will do great things. If you enjoyed this 60-minute story, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Before you go, I have a small question for you. What is one thing you are curious about today? Sleep well. Keep practicing. And remember that you have a bright light inside of you. Good night, and well done.